Thunder crashed overhead as Sophia Hartwell gathered the heavy silk of her wedding dress and ran through the hotel parking lot. Her bare feet splashed through puddles that reflected the neon lights of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, where 300 guests waited for a bride who would never return. The designer gown, worth more than most people's annual salary, clung to her trembling body like a beautiful prison she was finally escaping. Just 20 minutes earlier, she had stood in the bridal suite, staring at her reflection while her mother, Margaret, fussed over every detail. The woman in the mirror looked perfect on the surface. Porcelain skin, auburn hair swept into an elegant updo, emerald eyes that should have sparkled with joy, but instead held the dull resignation of the defeated. "You look absolutely radiant." "Darling," Margaret had whispered, adjusting the diamond tiara that had been in the Hartwell family for generations. "Richard will be so pleased." Richard Montrose. Even thinking his name made Sophia's stomach turn. The man she was supposed to marry in 10 minutes was everything her parents wanted in a son-in-law: wealthy, influential, and willing to save the Hartwell family from the financial ruin that threatened to destroy their reputation. But he was also cold, controlling, and had a way of looking at her that made her feel like an object to be acquired, rather than a woman to be loved. The breaking point had come when Richard himself appeared in the doorway of the bridal suite, his steel-gray eyes scanning her from head to toe with the same expression he might use when inspecting a new car. "Perfect," he had said, approaching with predatory confidence. "In just a few minutes, you'll belong to me completely." The possessive tone in his voice, the way his fingers traced her collarbone without permission, the complete absence of warmth or genuine affection, it all crystallized into a moment of absolute clarity. Sophia couldn't do this. She wouldn't sacrifice her entire life for her family's financial security, so she ran now. As the storm raged around her, she found herself in the sprawling parking lot with nowhere to go. Her purse, her phone, her entire life was back in that suffocating bridal suite. Panic began to claw at her throat as she realized the magnitude of what she had just done. Where could she go in a wedding dress at midnight with no money and no plan? That's when she saw it. A sleek black Tesla parked in the shadows away from the hotel's main entrance. The car seemed almost to glow in the darkness, its pristine surface reflecting the storm clouds above. Something about it called to her, maybe desperation or pure instinct. But Sophia found herself approaching the vehicle. To her amazement, the passenger door was unlocked. Without hesitation, she slipped inside, pulling the door shut behind her with a soft click that felt like the sound of freedom itself. The interior was luxurious beyond anything she had ever experienced. Soft leather that smelled of sandalwood and rain, ambient lighting that created an atmosphere of calm sophistication. She curled up in the passenger seat, trying to make herself invisible while her wedding dress pooled around her like spilled cream. Water from her hair dripped onto the expensive upholstery, and she hugged her knees to her chest, shivering from both cold and the emotional aftermath of her escape. "The mysterious stranger, you're safe now." The deep, warm voice came from the driver's seat, and Sophia's heart nearly stopped. Slowly, she turned to see a man watching her with eyes the color of midnight sky. Even in the dim light, she could tell he was handsome in a way that seemed almost sculpted. Strong jawline, dark hair that looked like he had been running his fingers through it, and an expression of gentle concern that was the complete opposite of Richard's cold calculation. "I'm sorry," Sophia stammered, reaching for the door handle. "I didn't know anyone was in here. I'll leave right now. Don't." His voice was firm but not harsh. Not in this storm, and certainly not in bare feet. Only then did Sophia realize she had lost her shoes somewhere between the hotel lobby and the parking lot. She looked down at her muddy feet and felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her. "I'm Nathaniel Stone," the man said, his voice carrying a hint of an accent she couldn't quite place. "I'm guessing you're the bride who decided freedom was worth more than security." Sophia stared at him in shock. "How do you know that?" Nathaniel smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face from mysterious to warmly approachable. "Because I've been watching the hotel for the past hour, waiting for someone. When I saw a woman in a wedding dress running through the rain like her life depended on it, it wasn't hard to piece together what happened." "You were waiting for someone," Sophia repeated, her natural curiosity overriding her caution. At midnight in a storm? Business doesn't keep normal hours, Nathaniel replied, starting the car with a sound so quiet it was barely audible. But my meeting was canceled anyway. Apparently the bride-to-be decided to make a run for it, and that has consequences that ripple through many people's plans. Sophia felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. You're connected to Richard somehow. I was supposed to meet with Richard Montrose tonight about a business deal, Nathaniel confirmed, pulling out of the parking space with smooth precision. But I'm much more interested in the woman who had the courage to choose her own path over a life of comfortable misery. As they drove through the empty streets, Sophia studied Nathaniel's profile in the passing streetlights. There was something about him that seemed familiar, though she was certain they had never met. He had the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it, confidence that came from genuine strength rather than the need to dominate others. Where are we going? She asked, as he turned onto a tree-lined avenue she didn't recognize. Somewhere you can breathe, Nathaniel replied. Somewhere you can think clearly about what comes next. And then you decide what kind of life you want to build for yourself? An unexpected sanctuary? The car pulled up in front of a brownstone building that managed to be both elegant and welcoming. Unlike the ostentatious mansion where she had grown up or the cold modern spaces that Richard preferred, this place felt like a home rather than a showcase. This is where you live? Sophia asked, as Nathaniel held an umbrella over her while they walked to the front door. One of the places, he replied, producing a key. I travel frequently for business, but this is where I come when I need to remember who I am underneath all the corporate responsibilities. The interior of the brownstone continued the theme of understated luxury. Rich hardwood floors, carefully chosen artwork, shelves lined with books that looked like they had actually been read rather than selected by a decorator. Everything spoke of someone who valued substance over flash, comfort over impression. Must be freezing, Nathaniel said, noticing how Sophia was still shivering despite being out of the rain. Let me get you something warm to wear, and then we can talk. He disappeared up a staircase, leaving Sophia alone in what appeared to be a living room designed for actual living. She moved toward a wall of photographs, studying images that told the story of a life well lived, Nathaniel in business suits shaking hands with people she vaguely recognized as important, but also more personal shots of him hiking in mountains, working with his hands on what looked like construction projects, laughing with friends who seemed genuinely happy to be around him. One photograph in particular caught her attention. It showed a much younger Nathaniel, maybe in his early 20s, standing in front of a small office building with a sign that read, Stone Technologies, where innovation meets integrity. He looked proud, but also determined, as if he were staring down challenges that would have broken someone with less resolve. That was taken the day I opened my first office, Nathaniel said, returning with an armload of clothes. I was 23, had $700 in the bank, and absolutely no idea what I was doing. Stone Technologies, Sophia repeated, the name finally clicking into place. You're the Nathaniel Stone who revolutionized cybersecurity protocols. Among other things, he said, with a modesty that seemed genuine. I've been fortunate enough to build something meaningful. Sophia accepted the clothes he offered, soft gray sweatpants and a navy blue sweater that looked like it would be wonderfully oversized on her smaller frame. I'll change, and then I should probably figure out how to get home. Where is home? Nathaniel asked gently. The question hit her like a physical blow. The Hartwell estate belonged to her parents, who would be furious beyond measure when they discovered what she had done. Retreat's penthouse was obviously out of the question. Her small trust fund had been frozen months ago as part of the wedding arrangements, another way to ensure she couldn't escape the life that had been planned for her. I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathaniel studied her face with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow felt reassuring instead. Then tonight, home is here. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. As Sophia climbed the stairs to change clothes, she found herself wondering if this was all some sort of elaborate dream. 12 hours ago, she had been trapped in a life that felt like a beautiful cage. Now she was in the home of a man who seemed too good to be real, a billionaire who treated her like a person worth saving rather than an object to be acquired. But as she caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror, hair still damp from the rain, makeup smeared, wearing a wedding dress that had cost more than most people's cars. She knew this was all terrifyingly real. She had burned every bridge behind her, and now she was completely dependent on the kindness of a stranger who had every reason to send her back to the life she had rejected. Yet something in Nathaniel's eyes told her that he understood what it meant to fight for something. Better to refuse to accept the limitations that others tried to impose. For the first time in years, Sophia felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, she had the chance to discover who she really was beneath all the expectations and obligations that had defined her entire life. The woman who had fled through the rain had been Sophia Hartwell, the dutiful daughter who always did what was expected. The woman who would wake up tomorrow would be someone entirely new, someone who had chosen freedom over security and was ready to face whatever consequences that choice might bring. Sophia woke to the scent of coffee and something wonderful cooking downstairs. For a moment, she lay perfectly still in the most comfortable bed she had ever experienced, surrounded by soft morning light filtering through gauze curtains. The events of the previous night felt like a vivid dream until she caught sight of her wedding dress hanging on the back of a chair, still damp and wrinkled from her escape through the storm. She had slept in Nathaniel's guest room wearing his oversized sweater and sweatpants, feeling safer than she had in months. Now, as consciousness fully returned, the reality of her situation began to sink in. By now, her parents would have discovered her absence. Richard would be furious. The scandal would be the talk of every social circle that mattered to the Hartwell family. But instead of the crushing anxiety she expected to feel, Sophia found herself surprisingly calm. She had made her choice, and for the first time in her 25 years, it had been entirely her own. After freshening up in the guest bathroom, she made her way downstairs, following the increasingly delicious aromas. She found Nathaniel in the kitchen, moving with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own space. He had traded the previous night's business attire for dark jeans and a simple white shirt that somehow made him look even more attractive than he had in the expensive suit. "Good morning," he said, looking up from the stove with a smile that made her heart skip. "I hope you're hungry. I may have gotten a bit carried away." The kitchen island held what looked like a feast: fresh fruit, pastries from what was obviously an expensive bakery, eggs Benedict that smelled heavenly, and coffee that made her mouth water just looking at it. "You didn't have to do all this," Sophia said, settling onto one of the bar stools. "I wanted to," Nathaniel replied, placing a perfectly prepared plate in front of her. "Besides, we have a lot to discuss, and important conversations always go better with good food." As they ate, Sophia found herself studying Nathaniel with new eyes. In the bright morning light, she could see details she had missed the night before. The way his dark hair had threads of silver at the temples, the tiny scar above his left eyebrow, calluses on his hands that spoke of someone who worked with more than just computers and contracts. "Can I ask you something?" she said, setting down her coffee cup. "Anything?" "Last night you said you were supposed to meet with Richard about a business deal. What kind of deal?" Nathaniel's expression grew serious. "He approached me about a partnership for a new development project, series of luxury hotels and resorts that would supposedly revolutionize the hospitality industry. Supposedly. I've learned to be cautious when someone's business proposal sounds too good to be true," Nathaniel said carefully. "Especially when that someone has a reputation for prioritizing profit over people." Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of reputation?" Nathaniel hesitated, clearly weighing how much to tell her. "Richard Montrose has been involved in several projects over the years where corners were cut, safety regulations were ignored, and workers were treated as expendable. He's very good at keeping his name out of the headlines, but the pattern is there if you know where to look. And you know where to look because I make it my business to know who I'm dealing with," Nathaniel said simply. "In my experience, how a person treats the people who can't fight back tells you everything you need to know about their character." Sophia stared down at her plate, her appetite suddenly gone. "My parents never told me any of this. They just said he was successful, that he could provide security and stability." "I'm sure they believed they were doing what was best for you," Nathaniel said gently. "But sometimes the people who love us most can't see past their own fears too. Recognize what we actually need. hidden talents and unexpected passions. After breakfast, Nathaniel gave Sophia a proper tour of the brownstone. Each room revealed new layers to his personality. A home office that managed to be both high-tech and warmly personal. A library with first editions mixed in with well-worn paperbacks. A music room with a baby grand piano that looked like it was actually played rather than just displayed. But it was when they reached the top floor that Sophia felt her breath catch. The entire space had been converted into an art studio. Floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the room with natural light. Canvases in various stages of completion leaned against the walls, and the scent of paint and turpentine filled the air. "You're an artist," she said, moving toward a particularly striking landscape that captured the energy of a storm over the ocean. "I dabble," Nathaniel replied, with the modest tone she was beginning to recognize as characteristic. "It helps me think through problems when the logical part of my brain gets stuck." Sophia found herself drawn to a series of paintings that seemed to tell a story. Abstract pieces that began dark and chaotic but gradually evolved into something brighter and more hopeful. "These are incredible. They're not just paintings, they're emotional journeys." "You have a good eye," Nathaniel said, moving to stand beside her. "Most people just see pretty colors." "I minored in art history in college," Sophia admitted, "before my parents convinced me to focus on more practical things." "What did you want to study?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with years of regret and abandoned dreams. "Fine arts," Sophia said quietly. "I wanted to be a painter. I used to spend hours in my room creating these elaborate fantasy worlds on canvas. Castles in the clouds, underwater kingdoms, forests where magic lived in every tree. What happened to those paintings? My mother convinced me to get rid of. Then when I turned 18, she said it was time to put away childish things and focus on finding a suitable husband." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, and when Sophia looked at him, she saw something like anger flash in his dark eyes. "Show me," he said suddenly. "What? Show me what you can create." He moved to a blank canvas, positioning it on an easel in the perfect spot to catch the morning light. "Paint something. Anything. Paint what you're feeling right now." "I haven't painted in years," Sophia protested. "I wouldn't even know where to start." "Then don't start with your mind," Nathaniel said, offering her a palette and brush. "With your heart." For a moment, Sophia just stared at the blank canvas, the brush trembling in her hand. Then, almost without conscious thought, she began to paint. Colors flowed from the brush as if they had been waiting years to escape, deep blues and stormy. Grays that gradually gave way to gold and silver and the palest pink of dawn. She lost track of time completely, aware only of the feel of the brush in her hand and the way the colors seemed to sing as they came together on the canvas. When she finally stepped back, she was amazed to see that she had created something that captured exactly what the last 24 hours had felt like: the darkness of feeling trapped, the chaos of escape, and finally, the tentative hope of new beginnings. "That's extraordinary," Nathaniel said softly. And when Sophia looked at him, she saw something in his expression that made her heart race. It wasn't just admiration for her artistic skill. It was something deeper, warmer, more personal. "It's just a painting," she said, suddenly shy. "No," Nathaniel replied, stepping closer. "It's a declaration of independence, you, announcing to the world that you're more than what other people tried to make you." He looked at her, as if she were something precious and powerful and worth cherishing. Made Sophia feel like she might be able to become the person she'd always dreamed of being. For so long she had defined herself by other people's expectations: the dutiful daughter, the perfect socialite, the compliant bride-to-be. But here, in this sunlit studio with paint still wet on her fingers, she felt like she was finally meeting herself. Dangerous discoveries. Their moment was interrupted by the sharp buzz of Nathaniel's phone. He frowned at the screen before answering, his voice taking on the crisp professional tone she imagined he used in boardrooms. "Stone here." A pause. "What? Do you mean the contracts were altered?" Another pause, longer this time, and Sophia could see tension building in his shoulders. "No, absolutely not. We don't do business that way, and anyone who suggests otherwise can find another partner." Ended the call with more force than necessary, running a hand through his hair in obvious frustration. "Problems?" Sophia asked. "Richard Montrose apparently doesn't handle rejection well," Nathaniel said grimly. "He's been making calls all morning. He's trying to pressure me into the deal by suggesting that backing out would be bad for my reputation." "He actually hurt your business. He can try," Nathaniel replied with a confidence that was somehow both reassuring and intimidating. "I didn't build Stone Technologies by backing down from bullies." Sophia felt a knot of worry form in her stomach. "This is because of me, isn't it? Because you helped me instead of returning me to him." Nathaniel turned to face her fully, his expression serious but gentle. "Sophia, listen to me carefully. Whatever Richard does or doesn't do has nothing to do with you and everything to do with the kind of man he is. You didn't create this situation. You just refused to be a victim of it." Before Sophia could respond, Nathaniel's phone buzzed again. This time, his expression darkened considerably as he read whatever message had appeared on the screen. "What is it?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Nathaniel hesitated, clearly debating how much to tell her. "Richard has been in touch with your parents. According to my source, he's convinced them that you've been kidnapped." Sophia felt the blood drain from her face. Kidnapped. "He's claiming that no woman in her right mind would leave such an advantageous marriage voluntarily, suggesting that someone with criminal intent must have taken you." "But that's insane," Sophia said, though even as the words left her mouth, she could imagine how convincing Richard could be. Her parents were already terrified of financial ruin. If Richard painted himself as the concerned groom trying to rescue his beloved bride, they would believe anything that allowed them to avoid facing the truth about their daughter's real feelings. Insane, but potentially effective, Nathaniel agreed. If he can convince the authorities that you were taken against your will, he has legal justification for having you found and returned. Sophia sank into a nearby chair, the weight of her situation finally hitting her fully. "So I'm trapped. If I go back, I'll be forced into a marriage with a man who's already proven he'll lie and manipulate to get what he wants. If I stay hidden, I'm technically a missing person who could be returned to him by force." "Not necessarily," Nathaniel said, his voice taking on a tone she hadn't heard before, something sharp and determined and utterly uncompromising. "Richard made one crucial mistake." "What? Assumed you were helpless?" Nathaniel moved to his desk, pulling out a laptop and typing rapidly. "You're a Hartwell, which means you have legal rights that even Richard can't override. And more importantly, you're under the protection of someone who has spent the last 15 years learning how to fight people exactly like him." As Sophia watched Nathaniel work, she realized that she was seeing yet another side of the man who had rescued her from the storm. This wasn't just the successful businessman or the talented artist or the thoughtful host. This was someone who had learned to be a warrior when necessary. Someone who understood that sometimes the only way to protect what mattered was to be willing to fight for it, and for reasons she was only beginning to understand. She mattered to him not as a trophy or a business asset or a way to secure social standing, but as a person worth defending simply because she deserved to be free. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. Sophia had spent so long being protected by her family's money and status that she had never learned to protect herself. Now she was about to discover what it meant to have someone choose to stand with her not because they had to, but because they wanted to. "What do we do?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Nathaniel looked up from his laptop, and the smile that crossed his face was unlike anything she had seen before, fierce and confident and absolutely determined. "We remind Richard Montrose that some people can't be bought, can't be intimidated, definitely can't be stolen," he said. "And then we make sure he never tries to hurt you again." The next few hours transformed Nathaniel's peaceful brownstone into a command center. His dining room table disappeared under stacks of legal documents, laptops, and phones that seemed to ring constantly. Sophia watched in amazement as Nathaniel orchestrated what could only be described as a carefully planned war against Richard Montrose. "I need everything you can find on the Meridian construction deal from 2019, Nathaniel said into one phone while typing on his laptop with his free hand. "Yes, especially the safety violations that were covered up." He paused, listening. I don't care how buried the records are. Dig them up. Sophia curled up in a nearby armchair, wearing a soft cashmere dress that Nathaniel had somehow acquired. For her, along with an entire wardrobe that fit perfectly. She was beginning to realize that when Nathaniel Stone decided to take care of someone, he did so with the same precision and attention to detail that had made him successful in business. "Who are all these people helping us?" she asked during a brief lull in the phone calls. "Investigators, lawyers, journalists, who specialize in exposing corporate corruption," Nathaniel replied, finally sitting down beside her. "Over the years, I've learned that the best defense against people like Richard is to make sure their own secrets see the light of day. You've done this before. Richard isn't the first powerful man who thought he could push around people he considered beneath him," Nathaniel said, his voice carrying a weight of old battles fought and won. "The difference is that this time, it's personal." Before Sophia could ask what he meant by that, his phone rang again. This time, his expression shifted as he listened to whoever was on the other end. "Your parents want to meet," he said after ending the call, "at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel with Richard. Apparently they have something they want to discuss." Sophia felt her stomach drop. "They want me to come back, probably," Nathaniel agreed. "But you don't have to do anything." "You don't want to do, Sophia. That's what this whole fight is about. Your right to choose your own life." "What if they disown me?" she asked, voicing the fear that had been growing since yesterday. "What if I lose my family forever?" Nathaniel took her hands in his, and she could feel the warmth and strength in his touch. "Then you'll build a new family with people who love you for who you are, not who they want you to be." The simple certainty in his voice made something tight in Sophia's chest finally relax. She realized that somewhere in the last 2 days, this man had become more than just her rescuer. He had become her anchor, the person who believed in her, even when she struggled to believe in herself. "I want to go," she said suddenly. "I want to face them." Nathaniel studied her face carefully. "Are you sure?" "No," Sophia admitted. "But I'm tired of running, and I'm tired of letting other people make decisions about my life without me being in the room." The confrontation, an hour later, they walked into the Grand Metropolitan Hotel together. Sophia wore a simple but elegant navy dress that made her feel both beautiful and powerful. Nathaniel stayed close beside her, his presence a constant reminder that she wasn't facing this alone. They found her parents and Richard waiting in a private dining room that had been closed to other guests. Margaret Hartwell looked like she had aged 10 years overnight, her usual perfect composure replaced by obvious distress. James Hartwell sat rigidly in his chair, his face a mask of barely controlled anger. And Richard looked exactly as he always did, completely in control and utterly confident that he would get what he wanted. "Sophia, darling," Margaret rose immediately, reaching toward her daughter with trembling hands. "Thank goodness, you're safe. We were so worried when Richard told us what happened." "What exactly did Richard tell you happened?" Sophia asked, staying close to Nathaniel. "That you were obviously coerced," James said, his voice tight with fury as he glared at Nathaniel. "That this man took advantage of your pre-wedding nerves to manipulate you into leaving." Sophia felt anger flash through her, hot and clean and liberating. "And it never occurred to you that I might have left because I didn't want to marry Richard?" "Don't be ridiculous." Richard spoke for the first time, his tone patronizing in a way that made Sophia's skin crawl. "You were nervous, sweetheart. All brides get cold feet. But running away and spending the night with a stranger is hardly the solution." "Mr. Stone is not a stranger," Sophia said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "He's a friend who offered help when I needed it most." "A friend who happens to be a business rival with every reason to sabotage our wedding," Richard replied smoothly. "How convenient that he was there to rescue you." Nathaniel had remained silent throughout the exchange, but now he stepped forward. Slightly. "Actually, Mr. Montrose, I think we should discuss why you're so eager to complete this particular marriage contract." "What's that supposed to mean?" James demanded. "It means your future son-in-law hasn't been entirely honest about his motivations," Nathaniel said, pulling a folder from his briefcase. "Sophia, your family's financial troubles aren't just about bad investments. They're about very specific debts to very specific people. He placed a series of documents on the table, and Sophia watched her father's face go pale as he recognized what he was seeing. Richard has been buying up your family's debts for the past 6 months, Nathaniel continued. Not to help you, but to control you. The marriage wasn't a rescue, Mr. Hartwell. It was a hostile takeover. That's preposterous, Richard said. But Sophia noticed that his usual confidence had slipped slightly. Is it? Nathaniel asked, placing another document on the table. Because according to this contract, once the marriage was complete, Richard would have legal control over all Hartwell family assets. Your house, your business holdings, even your daughter's trust fund. Margaret sank back into her chair, her face white with shock. Richard, please tell me this isn't true. Business is business, Margaret, Richard replied, his mask finally slipping. Completely, your family was drowning. I threw you a lifeline. Terms were always going to be in my favor. The terms included treating their daughter like property, Nathaniel said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. Which brings us to the more interesting question of why you're so determined to marry Sophia specifically. Richard's eyes narrowed. I don't know what you're implying. Not implying anything, Nathaniel replied. I'm stating facts. Sophia's great-grandmother was Charlotte Hartwell, who inherited a significant portfolio of New York real estate that was placed in a trust. That trust becomes accessible to Sophia on her 26th birthday or upon her marriage, whichever comes first. Sophia stared at Nathaniel in shock. I don't know anything about a trust. Because your parents were told by their lawyers that it had been dissolved years ago, Nathaniel said gently. But trusts like that don't just disappear. They get hidden by people who benefit from keeping the beneficiaries ignorant. Placed one final document on the table, and Sophia could see Richard's hands clench into fists as he recognized what it was. The Charlotte Hartwell Trust is currently worth approximately $50 million, Nathaniel announced. And according to the original terms, it becomes the property of Sophia's husband upon marriage. That's what this was really about, wasn't it, Richard? Not love, not even business strategy. It's just old-fashioned theft. Truth and consequences, the silence that followed, was deafening. Sophia looked around the table at the faces of people she had thought she knew, her parents, who had been so desperate to save themselves that they had been willing to sacrifice her future, and Richard, whose carefully constructed facade had finally crumbled to reveal the calculating predator beneath. $50 million, she said, quietly. You were going to sell me for $50 million. Sophia, sweetheart. We didn't know, Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. We thought we were saving the family. By trading me like livestock, Sophia replied, surprised by how calm she felt. Did it ever occur to any of you to ask what I wanted? We thought you understood your responsibilities, James said, though. His voice lacked its earlier conviction. My responsibilities, Sophia repeated. What about your responsibilities as parents? What about protecting me instead of sacrificing me? Richard stood abruptly, his composure finally shattering completely. This is ridiculous. Sophia, stop being dramatic. We had an agreement. You had an agreement with my parents, Sophia said, standing to face him. But I'm not my parents' property to trade. I'm a person with my own rights and my own choices. A naive girl who doesn't understand how the world works, Richard snapped. Without me, your family will lose everything. Then let them lose it, Sophia said, and the words felt like breaking chains. I won't destroy my life to pay for their mistakes. Richard's face darkened with rage. You, ungrateful, little careful, Nathaniel interrupted, his voice carrying a warning that made Richard step back instinctively. I'd choose your next words very carefully. This isn't over, Richard said, but even he seemed to realize how empty the threat sounded. Actually, it is, Nathaniel replied, pulling out his phone. Because while we've been having this conversation, my associates have been presenting evidence of your various business improprieties to the proper authorities. I believe the FBI should be executing search warrants on your offices right about now. Richard's face went from red to pale in an instant. You can't prove anything. Construction fraud, safety violations, resulting in worker injuries, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit identity theft. Nathaniel listed calmly. My investigators are very thorough, Richard. And unlike the officials you've been bribing, federal agents are surprisingly difficult to buy." As if summoned by his words, two men in dark suits appeared in the doorway of the private dining room. "Richard Montrose," one of them said, showing a badge. "FBI, you need to come with us." The next few minutes passed in a blur of shouted protests, legal rights being read, and the sight of Richard Montrose being led away in handcuffs. Sophia watched it all with a sense of surreal detachment, as if she were observing someone else's life. New beginnings later. After the FBI had gone, and her parents had left with promises to call once they had time to process everything that had happened, Sophia found herself alone with Nathaniel in the hotel's elegant lobby. "Is it really over?" she asked, still not quite able to believe it. "The legal part is just beginning," Nathaniel said honestly, "but the part where Richard Montrose controls your life. That ended the moment you decided to run." They walked outside into the evening air. Sophia realized that exactly 48 hours ago, she had been preparing for a wedding that would have destroyed her. Now she was free, truly free, for the first time in her adult life. "What happens now?" she asked as they reached Nathaniel's car. "Now you decide what kind of life you want to build," Nathaniel replied. "You have your trust fund, which means you have financial independence. You have your talent, which means you have purpose. And you have the knowledge that you're strong enough to fight for what matters." "And what if what matters includes you?" Sophia asked, surprised by her own boldness. Nathaniel turned to face her, and in his eyes, she saw everything she had hoped. To find their love, respect, genuine care, and the promise of a partnership built on equality rather than ownership. "Then I'd say you've made another excellent choice," he said softly, reaching up to touch her face with gentle fingers. "Because somewhere between rescuing you from that storm and watching you paint your freedom, I fell completely in love with the extraordinary woman you've always been." When he kissed her, it was nothing like the cold, possessive touches she had endured from Richard. This was warm and tender and full of promise, the kiss of a man who saw her as his equal, his partner, his choice, just as much as she was choosing him. "I love you too," Sophia whispered against his lips. "I think I started falling the moment you told me I was safe." As they drove through the city streets toward home, and Nathaniel's brownstone had definitely become home in her heart, Sophia reflected on how completely her life had changed. 2 days ago, she had been Sophia Hartwell, the dutiful daughter, preparing for a loveless marriage. Tonight, she was simply Sophia, a woman who had discovered that sometimes the most frightening leaps lead to the most beautiful landings. 6 months later, she had her first art show in a gallery that Nathaniel had helped her find but hadn't bought for her. The paintings were hers, the success was hers, and the life she was building was entirely her own choice. When Nathaniel proposed on the anniversary of the night they met, he did it in the art studio where she had rediscovered herself, surrounded by canvases that told the story of a woman learning to fly. And when Sophia said yes, it wasn't because she had to, or because it was expected, or because it would solve anyone else's problems. She said yes because she had found a man who loved her freedom as much as he loved her, who celebrated her strength instead of trying to diminish it, and who understood that the best kind of love is the kind that makes both people more than they could ever be alone. The runaway bride had thought she was escaping into the unknown. Instead, she had run straight into the arms of destiny, discovered that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the courage to write your own ending.